Good evening, everybody. I think we'll get started now. But before I start my official agenda, here's a little something I picked up at Roots Tech. And it's free, okay? So it's called zoompast.com. I've actually got a little pamphlet and 3 or 4 business cards over on the table on the side. And it's free. The guy's hoping that one of the big companies will pick this up, but it's free for now. And what you do is you upload a GEDCOM from your family tree computer program, and it comes into this interface, which is kind of more interesting for your family. So for instance here, if I click there, it zooms in. And if I keep clicking, it keeps zooming in and shows the siblings. So you can see it's kind of fun. It's a fun thing and it's free. So I thought I'd show that first before I start everything else. Okay, so. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm not sure if I actually showed this that well last month, but what do you see in the tree? Ontario, yes.
Very clever.
I thought it was extremely clever. So this is the new logo that Ontario Genealogical Society is going to start using. It does say the Ontario Genealogical Society on the bottom, but they are going to go with the brand name of Ontario Ancestors. And the reason is that down in the US there's a lot of people whose ancestors came through Ontario, so they're trying to attract the American audience, but yeah, I've got one. And everything else stays the same. I mean, they still cater to us. They still, even people who are first generation Canadian, that's not changing at all. So just thought I'd show you that one. They also found when you mentioned OGS down in the States, they think you mean Ohio Genealogical Society, or Oregon Genealogical Society, or Oklahoma. So by using Ontario Ancestors, they felt it was more indicative of what we do. So this is our agenda for the day. We have 2 features. Is there anybody here who's here for the very first time? Okay. I'm going to ask you, oh good. Well, she certainly looked it. I'm going to ask you to stand up, not to embarrass you. No, it's not for that. We want to know what names you're researching. Oh, yes, yes. Okay. And your own name. We'll start with that.
I'm Sher Leetooze.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Valerie Winters is her name, and her maiden name was Harris.
And, I'm just researching a lot.
Well, let's have maybe your 4 grandparents' last names.
Okay, so I've got Harris, and I've got Merrithew.
Merrithew? Merrithew.
Yeah,
Okay.
Maritimes. Raritan.
Raritan.
And Lloyd.
Lloyd. And where's Lloyd from?
Well, originally England, but
Yeah.
In Quebec also.
In Quebec. Oh. Thank you. And at the break, John at the very back keeps a list. He's got his hand up now. Well, now he put it down again. Now he's got it up again. Thank you, John. And we keep a list so that hopefully we may connect you up to someone else. Now, For a variety of reasons, our May 11th workshop day is now October 19th. The chief one was the fact that we didn't get hardly any submissions from speakers, so I needed more time to go out and beat the bushes. So, October 19th, still at Faith United Church. Hopefully it will be a good day, and we'll tell you more later. The latest Families is out, and you will find it in the Members Corner. Okay? If you haven't, like me, you keep forgetting to look for it, that's where it is, Members Corner. And I have some information here from our sister branch, Kawartha. They're having their annual research day to the Ontario Archives. They rent a bus. I think it has 33 spots. And it will actually pick up people in Oshawa. They're very aware that sometimes our branch members like to go. So the meeting place is Stevenson Road and 401 in the Swiss Chalet parking lot across from Walmart. It's $40, but you have to get yourself reserve a spot, as it were. There's the email address to notify them, let them know your phone number, and they're going to phone you and give you more details, like maybe a time. Okay? And we're in Archives Awareness Week, just thought you'd like to know that. And some of the branch members will be hopefully coming with me. We're going to do a 6-part beginners program at the Bowmanville Public Library. It's free. It's on a drop-in basis. I've got a few of the library program leaflets there if you're interested. This is a picture of what the page looks like. It's the easiest thing I could do. So the Bowmanville Library is downtown on Church Street, Church and Temperance, and after our course, the Curtis branch of the library is going to do the Ancestry Library Edition training. So I think that will marry very well with our program.
Nancy?
Yes.
Both libraries have great wireless, free and open.
Yes. So good wireless at both of the library branches.
Not like we're getting right now.
Okay. B is not here. Okay. We have no correspondence to give you. But I will ask for Sheila to come up and give us a treasurer's report.
Okay, so for our current account, our balance is $4,555.96. In March, we had deposits of $75.50 and withdrawals of $343.07.
Thank you, Sheila.
Come.
I guess I didn't find any other news to put into that slide, sorry. So, if you're going to conference and you haven't registered yet, you've missed the early bird cutoff date. It was Sunday. But by all means, go ahead and register. It's going to be a good time. OGS is having a webinar this Thursday. Tammy Tipler-Priolo is going to talk about an Italian immigrant's journey to Ontario at 7 p.m. And you don't have to be an OGS member to see the webinars. You can just click on education on the main website. Okay. Our main program today is Sher, and she's going to talk about research experiences on the road again. But first, we'll get her set up as everybody takes a coffee break, okay? So we'll see you again in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Using this computer?
Yes. So I'd like to welcome Sher Leetooze. She's a local historian and writer and raconteur, and we've always enjoyed her talks. So she's going to talk about research experiences on the road and at home. So take it away.
I'll just stand off to the side here so I don't get in anybody's view. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's nice to see so many people here. I hate to say it, Nancy, but what I'm going to talk about tonight cannot be covered with DNA. Cannot. This is something you're going to have to do outside DNA research. Now, I don't know about you, but every now and then I will uncover a little something about my family, and I'll just stand up and I'll either like that, or I'll jump around and wahoo, woohoo. I don't do it too loudly. You know, people think I'm nuts, but I do give my little victory dance, and I'm very pleased when I find it. And I'm sure everybody here has had an experience like that, right?
Yeah.
Right, good. Well, some of my wahoo moments were finding the dwelling places of my ancestors, the actual bricks and mortar or cob and thatch house. And I found some of those too. Now, I guess I need a clicker, don't I?
Yeah.
There we go. Right, on the road in Ireland. Whenever you do dwelling place research, you really have to do your due diligence. I searched and searched Ireland for a place in Armagh. We knew he'd come from Armagh. We knew he was a weaver, and we knew he was a Quaker. And so I searched Armagh for a place where there were weavers and Quakers both. And I found it at Rich Hill, a little place that's almost it, right there in the bottom. There's not much more to Rich Hill than what you see there. A couple of houses in the back street, and that's about it. So we went to Ireland on a research trip, planning full well to find Rich Hill and see if we could find the ancestors. Now, the night before we took the train out to Rich Hill, well, we had to go to Portadown and take a bus to Rich Hill. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give the internet one more stab and see if I can find a little more about Rich Hill. And by golly, do you know there's websites over there that we can't get here? They're really, I didn't realize that. And the first thing that came up when I punched in Rich Hill, Armagh, into this Google search was the Rich Hill Historical Society. And I thought, holy liftin', why didn't I get this before? Well, I emailed the guy. It's now 10 o'clock at night. And I thought, I emailed him. And I said, I'm going to be there tomorrow morning. If somebody from the society can meet me and tell us a little something about Rich Hill. Well, we got off the bus in Rich Hill in the morning, and a fellow with a baby carriage is standing there saying, "Are you Sher?" And of course, I certainly did not expect to meet anybody, especially a fellow with a baby carriage. So anyway, I admitted to being Sher, and away we went. His name was Malcolm, and he took us out to lunch. He took us out in the car to meet the mayor of Armagh City. She was not in the office that day, and he thought she'd be a good one to pawn us off on. Mainly because I had told him my people had lived at Shuas. We had found that in Prony, at the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in Belfast, a couple of days before. We found the name of the house where they lived, the farm that they lived on. And so, I guess townland, I should say. Anyway, away we went out to the Mare of Armagh, because she and her husband owned the Shoas flock. When he was growing up, he lived either on Shoas or next door to Shoas, and when he became a farmer in his own right and started his flock of sheep, he called it the Shoas flock because that was his home. And so he thought, okay, Shoas, she'll be a good one. So he pawned us off on Frida Donnelly for the morning. Now Frida did take us out to Shoas, and this is me and the farmer at Shoas down in the bottom. And unfortunately, the old house had been taken down 5 years before because it was so dangerous he thought it was going to kill somebody. And he thought it was really funny when I asked him if he had taken a picture of it before he ripped it down. And he went, no. As though that was a really weird idea. So I still don't know what the place looked like, but it was gone. But the view from that hilltop out over, oh, it was a gorgeous valley. It was a view to die for. And I said, and they left this to go to Tyrone? Anyway, they did. They left Shoas. But he then took us on a tour of Rich Hill. And if you go straight up this main street in the bottom picture, you come to this old 17th century house. Now, the man that built that house was Richardson. He owned that parish and many more all the way around. He was a Quaker. Anyone who worked for him was also much better off if they were Quakers too. So my ancestor worked for Richardson. He did weaving, and Richardson agent would come to the house and pick up the weaving and drop off more orders. And so he lived on Richardson land. He worked for Richardson. He attended Quaker meeting. Now, later on in the morning, Frida Donnelly went with us to a house of Robin Macready, an elderly gentleman who gave me this little book. And it's all about the meeting at Rich Hill. And in the center of it is a map drawn in 1779, and it's of the parish, and it has numbers all over it. That's his congregation, the minister's congregation. And so I looked up the pages. He said, go back a page and read it. And it says, names of the friends in unity. In other words, they had paid their subscription. My people are not on it. So we go one page further past, and it is names of the friends not in unity. And there's my people. They had not paid their subscription ever, ever, ever. Not just that year, but ever, ever, ever. And so when you look their number up, there they are on the map. Let's see if we can find it. Down at the bottom circle, 57 and 58, that's my family. Further up is Mulladry Cottage. They also lived in that cottage. And further up again is a John Blair. I don't know who he is, but because he lived in the parish and he was also at the Quaker meeting, I'm assuming he was related somehow. I've got to find him. But that is the three places where the minister had shown he had congregation. Now this is a modern OS map, and if you will take a little look, that's my ancestors over here. That's Mulladry Cottage. Oh no, oh yeah, that's Mulladry Cottage here. And this one here is this guy here. Not quite the same configuration, but still a triangle. I can see the similarities. So that's ancestral homes and ancestral people. So I have to find them. Now later that day, we met up with Malcolm again after being out to Rich Hill, and he took us over to the parish church, the Church of Ireland. Now it was 2 miles that way out of town, My people live 2 miles that way out of town. And so in order to collect parish relief, just like in Britain, you had to attend the state church, and you were baptized and buried out of the state church. And so we had to go and visit the state church. But to think that they walked 4 miles out and 4 miles back every Sabbath, I couldn't believe it. It wouldn't be that important to me to do that, but I guess it was for them. So then, when it was time to go home, Malcolm said, I'll drive you back to Portadown. I said, well, can we go by way of Mulladry Cottage? And I gave him the OS map, and he looked at it, and he turned it, and yeah, he said, I think I can find that. And we took all these back roads. Turns out it's an apple orchard, an apple farm now. And there it was. There is Mulladry Cottage. And I'll tell you, I nearly died when I saw that. There was a fellow coming in on the tractor, and I jumped out of the car and I went over and I said, is this Mulladry Cottage? And he goes, I said, can I take pictures of it? And the tractor never stopped moving. He just kept right on going. He didn't care. But I sure did. It's a farm building now, full of stuff for running a farm. I think there was even some old tractor tires in it. And but even so, that was Mulladry Cottage. I don't think this bit on the end was there when my people were in. But I can just imagine that they had the loom set up downstairs and they lived in the upstairs, because it was probably a pretty big loom. And so there, I had to touch the stones, you know. Oh, I touched the house they lived in. You see, they came out here in 1830. 1830. So that house was old then. That house was old in the mid-1920s when they lived there. So it was probably another 100 years or more past that. So there's the 2 Irish properties. Oh, here's my thing. Still on the road, but we're over home, many hundreds of miles from Rich Hill. And here we are in Cornwall. We were there for a visit a few years ago, and I said to Roger's brother, I want you to take me down to St. Hugh Parish. So I explained where St. Hugh was. If you know Cornwall at all, it's right down on the south coast near a place called Mevagissey, or not far from Falmouth. That one you probably know. Mevagissey, I don't imagine you would. It's a little fishing village, but there is the house in St. Hugh Parish in a little tiny hamlet of about 6 houses, and it's called Palmassic. So we pulled into Palmassic, and there's a fellow out pulling all his tools out of his garage and laying them on the lawn, and stopped the car, and I said, would you have any idea which house would have been the butcher's house 150 years ago? And he said, oh yes, the 3rd one up. And so we walked up the street, the 3rd one up, and that's it. A beautiful, beautiful cottage with a thatched roof. Oh my goodness, it's lovely, isn't it? And I had to touch the walls on that one too. But there was nobody home that day. I assume the house has been reconfigured, because to get into that house now you have to go all the way around the back. But right here, this window here looked as if it could have been a door. It's much bigger than the other windows on the ground floor, and I think at one time it was probably the door into the butcher shop. But my 2 times great-grandmother grew up in that house. Her father was the butcher. His father before him was the butcher in that house. And so I was rather pleased to find that place. But if I hadn't known that he was the butcher, if I hadn't accessed old census and found that he was a butcher, then I would not have been able to find Palmasic, and I wouldn't have been able to find the house by knowing it was the butcher's house. So the guy that told us was probably into local history, and that's how he knew. But there you go. But I'll tell you, it doesn't matter whether you're in Ireland or Cornwall or England or any place. You have to ask, or people can't help you. But when you ask, everybody is so willing to help. They really are. Look at Malcolm in Ireland. Look at Frida Donnelly, the mayor of Armagh, for heaven's sake, taking us around to show us ancestral homes. You don't think that's possible, but it is. It really is. You just have to ask. So remember that when you start going searching. Just ask. Now we're on the Cornish Road again. And I guess it was the year 2000. I went over and did my research project, putting flesh on the bones of your Devon and Cornwall ancestors. And I thought, while I'm here, I might as well look for some ancestral homes. And away we went out to the parish of Morwenstow. And the circle up there, it's the northernmost parish of Cornwall, tucked right up under Devon. And I think it's just a countryside. But everybody I spoke to over there said, oh, your people come from way out in that wild place. I said, a wild place? What's wild? Oh, it's just wild. They meant nobody lives out there, eh? It's all gorse and it's just wild. It's on the Atlantic coast. Anyway, I went out. It's a lovely place. It really is. Beautiful, calm countryside. I'm assuming you had to be hardy to live out there, because it feels like there's a constant spray coming off the ocean where the waves hit the rocks, come up over the cliffs, and they lived about 3/4 of a mile to a mile inland, and you could feel it. You could feel it in the air. So you probably had to be pretty hardy to put up with that all year long. A close-up, the parish of Morwenstow. Now this is quite an old map. It's really, the handwriting is real flowery and it's hard to read. But the church was further up here. This is the little hamlet of Woodford, and just at the crossroads right here was 5 little agricultural laborers' cottages all in a row, just like down on Olive Avenue. And they were all in a row. And my people lived in one, and the girl next door that my 2 times great-grandfather married lived next door. And grandparents then lived next door to that. And so they all shared part of this row of cottages. Now when we arrived, you're going to think this is nuts, but it's honest to God truth. It really is. I was getting out of the car, and out of the blue, and it was my mouth that said it, oh my God, my house is gone. It wasn't me that said it. It may have come out of my mouth, but it was not me that said it. I do not know who was traveling with us, but their house was gone. And it was. I got a hold of the Historical Society after we got home, and I said, I thought there was 5 cottages and not 3. And he said, oh yes, that's right. In the 1920s, they took 2 of them down to make room for a new house. So there you go. Whoever it was got out of the car with me and said, oh my God, my house is gone. Well, of course, everybody that was in the car with us went, they gave me a wide berth for the rest of the day, believe me. But there's the 3 cottages. Now this was taken from across the road. You can't really see it well because there's garages in the way, tucked into the bank there. But that's the 3 cottages, and it's taken from the back. On that end was the other 2 cottages that where this ancestor had lived. But from those other 2 cottages, there's a pathway on the OS maps that goes right across to East what do they call it? Eastaway, the manor house in the parish. So I'm thinking that they were agricultural laborers at Eastaway, because that's where the path went, from their house right across to the manor. So anyway, there you go. You have to do a little bit of research. But the name of the cottages was Ovis, and I got that from the census. They lived at Ovis, and I had to go in search of Ovis to find where it was. On the road again, but this time making discoveries much closer to home in Quebec. The same ancestor that was at Mulladry Cottage and at Shuas Farm at Rich Hill came to Canada in 1830 and settled at what would become Franklin in Quebec. Not far from the American border, actually. In those days, it was the Beauharnois Seigneurie, and he had a piece of land on the seigneurie. But I don't think it was the first time that ancestors had come out. I think he himself came out when he was 21, in about 1801. He went to the States, married a girl in Upper New York State, not far from that piece of land, and their piece of land was, and I'll show you how close to the border, right about there. Yes, where the Lake Champlain and then the Richelieu River comes up through, and it was about 2 miles to the west from the Richelieu River, right along the first concession, so a half a mile or less from the States. But I think he came out, went to the States, married a girl near Plattsburgh, which is there by Lake Champlain and the Richelieu, and they came up to Quebec and built a cabin. And she died, probably in childbirth, and he went home to Ireland and left everything. 20 years later, he marries again. He was middle-aged when he married my ancestral grandmother. She wasn't, but he was. And came back out again when his kids were born. But in the meantime, a Thomas Blair, we don't yet know how he was related because the parish records just don't exist before 1800. But we assume he would be a brother or a cousin. And his wife died, probably about 1812, 1813. And I do believe my William said, look, Tom, there's a cabin going free over in Canada. Take your little kids and go. And I think he did, because he ended up living in Quebec and taking up a piece of land, same place. Oop, wrong one. Right there. Isn't that something? Now, I did not find that cabin. We knew where he had lived, and some relatives that live a lot closer went scouting, and they found the cabin. Now, they found this one, okay? They found, it was all joined, but the people that lived there today bought this one. It was already situated on the lot. And I think that cabin was put up by her, Betsy's father and brother, when they joined them in Quebec in about 1803, 1804.
Sher, was that 2 wives that died, or just the first one?
No, just the first one, Betsy.
Okay.
And then they found this cabin a couple of lots over, which would have been the Grimshaw cabin, and they moved it up close and joined it on to make a bigger house. And that's what I think those 2 cabins are. Now, my cousin in Kingston went down to Quebec with the relatives that found the cabin, and she took the picture and emailed it to me. So I didn't have anything to do about finding that one. But it was so wonderful to open an envelope. She didn't even tell me she was sending it. She didn't even tell me she was going down. Open an envelope and find a picture and the notes on the back of it. Woo! That was really good. That was really good, because that house dates before Mulladry Cottage of 1830, doesn't it? That's 1801 or 2. We know that Thomas lived in that cabin because there is a record of him in the history books from that part of the country. He was hired on to do the repairs on Île aux Noix, the fort on the Richelieu River. After the War of 1812, authorities found out the fort was in such terrible repair during that war that they said, oh my gosh, we better do something about this. And Thomas Blair was one of the Irish laborers that they hired to repair the fort.
I only know about Chambly, that fort.
Further south from Chambly.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, further south, yeah.
So, Sher, how did you find out that he was hired?
There's a history book, and it's all in French, and I can't read it, but I went on the net and got a translation. It's the history book of that area. I should have got it and given you the name of it, but it is the history book of the area, and it gives a list of the people who worked on the fort. Not only that, but down the street down the road, the concession road from that Grimshaw cabin, was a family called Craik, C-R-A-I-K. Now, a descendant of that family came up to Port Hope, and he wrote a book called Little Tales of Old Port Hope. You may have seen it. Anyway, Craik also wrote history from down there. I think an ancestor of the Port Hope guy. And in it was a history of the Concession One and the Blairs and the Grimshaws and all the people. And so he also mentioned that he had worked on Île aux Noix. So you've got to read history books. You really, really do, because you can find out so much about your people in the darndest places. So we're on the road again to Devon. This time we're in search of Roger's family dwellings. Now, we knew his people had gone out to a little parish called Petertavy in about 1794 from Cornwall, from St. Agnes. They were copper miners and tin miners, and they moved out to Dartmoor, where there was also mining right on the edge of Dartmoor. And so we knew they had gone out there, and we went in search of miners' cottages. One of them lived in a little cottage called Scotland. When I first found it on the census and they said that they lived in Scotland, I thought, no, there's something wrong here. But that was the name of the cottage. And on the census, it's funny because one of them was listed as living at Stagness. And I thought, that's Scotland again. What the heck is going on? And Roger says, no. He said, think of the Cornish accent. It's St. Agnes. So, Stagness, Stagness. So, of course, the census taker wrote Stagness. And anyway, we got out there and we looked all around, and we found a local historian. Now, we had found the local historian because I'd sent a letter to the parish newsletter saying I was looking for information on the Penroses. And he emailed me as soon as he read it in the parish newsletter. He was a local historian, and he'd been collecting documents for years and years, and he knew just about everything there was to know about that area. And so he said, well, if you ever come over, I will take you out and show you around. And I said, well, isn't that funny? We're going to be there next month. And anyway, away we went, and we met him in the pub, and he took us up on the moor. Now, his house was also partway up on the moor, and he took us out, and he showed us Twist. And this was a family dwelling for on and off for many hundreds of years. Twist was built in the 1600s. It's the earliest document he could find, so he assumed that it was pretty well new when he found that document. As you can see, the family tree is growing out through the roof. But it's a lovely old place, and had the roof still been there, it was a fairly substantial house. There was a lounge and a kitchen downstairs and 4 bedrooms upstairs, albeit tiny little bedrooms, but you know, they were there. It was not a small house. It was a good, what would we say, middle class house, okay? He was a fairly prosperous farmer, but you can see by the land, look at this, it's all rocky. The land is no good for crops, but it's certainly good for cattle. And I'm sure this is what he did, was raise cattle on this land, grazed his cattle up there. And again, right up on the moor, you can see forever from up there. But it's right in the middle of a grove of trees, and had we gone out on the moor on our own, we would have followed the pathway and walked right past it, never knowing it was there. And so he took us in, but he said, I know it's there because I walk the dog up here every day. So he knew it was there and he took us out. Now these rocks are the parish boundary, or were at one time. It was a wall so high, but way back in antiquity it was the tribal boundary, and it only became the parish boundary in more modern times. And so we got up on the rocks, and they're only 6 inches high now, and we walked the tribal boundary. That was pretty neat. People don't often get to do that because it's such an old thing, you don't find it anymore.
And was this pre-Norman? I don't know, the Normans took over.
Oh God, it was like 4,000 years old, 5,000, 10,000 years old.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, it was really old. I mean, antiquity, prehistoric. So, Neolithic, I guess the proper word is. Anyway, that's what we found, the Neolithic wall, and we walked the parish boundary, the tribal boundary. But this place was surrounded by a stone wall. And part way up, the stones went like this, and part way up, the stones went like that. And we were told that the stones that go like that are Devon, they're laid by someone from Devon, and the stones that go like that are laid by someone from Cornwall. They lay their dry stone walls differently in different places, I guess. So the ancestors were both from Devon and from Cornwall, and we know that. Some of them were Maddocks, and whose daughters all married Cornishmen. So there you go. One of those Cornishmen may have had a hand in repairing the wall one year. But we wouldn't have been able to see Twist had we not put a notice in the parish newsletter. So that's an idea for you. Find out who's running the parish newsletter. Just put the name of the parish in a Google search and it'll tell you who does the local newsletter for the church, and put a notice in it. They're always glad to hear from relatives overseas. You'll get replies. I always do. Not from the people I wanted, but I do get some. We've had some adventures, let me tell you. Okay, whoops, too far. Okay, now, another time we went out, this was years later, we got in touch with Roger Merrick, the historian, and said we were interested in Zoar, because Roger's Leetooze ancestors had lived at Zoar. And so he got in touch with a fellow called George Lawson. I was also in touch with George Lawson, believe it or not, separately, because, and I'll give you this little secret, the Yellow Pages over in Britain have a section for farms. And I cut that section out of my mother-in-law's phone book. I said, are you about to visit or phone a farm any day now? And she says, no. And I said, well, then I can have these pages, I guess. What are you going to do with them? I said, take them home. Anyway, I wrote to the farm where the ancestors used to live. Not no one there today of any relation, but the fellow said, I know the family you're talking about. They did live here, and their descendants lived here. And when we bought the farm, there was a whole pile of stuff left in the house, and I kept saying, come and get it, come and get your stuff. And he said, finally, they came after about 2 years. And he said, the guy that lives out there that can tell you all about this is George Lawson. And so I wrote to George Lawson. Well, when we went out to see Zor, Roger Merrick introduced us to George Lawson, and we all had lunch in the pub, and we all drove out to Zor. Now, I'm sorry about the quality of this slide. My slide scanner is busted. And I thought, how am I going to get a copy of this slide? Because you can't just do it on any old flatbed scanner. So I went on the internet. How do you make a copy of a slide when you haven't got a slide scanner? That was my question. And it came back with a website where the guy says you make a little paper tent and you put your slide on the flatbed and you put the paper tent over it to catch the light, and you can get a copy of your slide. Well, of course it didn't work, so I put a hole in the top of my paper tent and I shone the flashlight in when the zzz went through, and by golly, I got some extra light and I played with it and jimmied with it, and that's the best I could get it. But that is Zor. Now that is miners' cottages. There was 3 cottages in a row. In the early 1800s, when the Bible Christians started, sometime after 1815, the very end cottage had been turned into a Bible Christian chapel. In 1904, they built a brand new chapel down the road this way from Zor, and that end cottage was turned back into a cottage again. Now, great-grandfather Leetooze lived in the middle one. George Lawson lived in the end one, which had been the chapel. And we went in. What a gorgeous place. They added a kitchen onto the side of it to make the place livable. And oh, beautiful. And she took me upstairs to one of the bedrooms. You have never been in such a restful, peaceful house. It was wonderful. And I've heard that before of chapels that have been turned into houses. The old Bible Christian chapel out at Columbus was turned into a house. And I was talking to people that had lived there, and the man had died, or her brother had died of cancer. But the house was so peaceful, she invited him in his last weeks to come and live with them. And he had never been so at ease and so rested and peaceful in his life as he was living his last weeks in that house. Apparently, that house just transformed him. And I can see it happening, because if I had stayed in that upstairs bedroom much longer, I would have been converted, believe me. Beautiful and restful, just wonderful. So then we took the key. Mrs. Lawson had the key. The lady that owned the third or the middle cottage was away, and she had the key because she went in to feed the cat. And off we went to see great-grandfather's house. Well, when we walked in, Roger's mom just stopped in the doorway dead. As you look in, because it's 2 rooms down, 2 rooms up, that's all. She stopped and looked in, and there was a sideboard against the far wall, and she said, my grandmother had a Welsh cupboard that sat right there. And she said, I thought that's what I was looking at when I walked in. She just felt so at home in the place because the cupboard was in the same place as her grandmother's cupboard. And she says to me, my Staffordshire dogs that I have, they sat one on each side of grandmother's Welsh cupboard. And so there you go. And she was just so tickled to have got into great-grandfather's house. She hadn't been there since she was a girl. And so we found Zor, and we had the tour. But we wouldn't have if I hadn't written to George Lawson and find out about that farm and the miners' cottages that sat on it. So write some letters. If you have to, do what I did. Steal the yellow pages from somebody and go through and find the family farm and write to them. They're wonderful people over there. They'll do anything to help you. They really will. The next job. I have to get a slide scanner because we still have about 2,000 slides, and in it are other ancestral homes. Not as old as these, not as far away as these, but still in need of having a copy made of them. And if you've got slides that you've taken over the years in your research and you have not made copies, please do it soon. Slides, like old photographs, deteriorate and change color. And before you know it, they're going to be useless. So if you've got some slides, do a few every Sunday afternoon or something, just to get them done, because they will deteriorate, and you never know, you're going to find some gems in there that you forgot you had. Some of the conclusions that I came up with as I took myself down memory lane with this little job, and that is about the slides. Go through your old slides. Don't hesitate to ask questions wherever you go. Tell people what you're looking for. No one can help you if they don't know what you need. So tell everybody. Wear a sign on the back of your backpack or something, and let people know what you're looking for. Do you know if you just put a Canadian flag on your collar or on your backpack, people will stop you everywhere and say, "Oh, you're Canadian. I have a cousin that lives near you out in Vancouver." You know? Oh yes, that's very close. But if they'll stop you for a flag, think what they'd do. If you said, "I'm looking for my ancestral home," they'll stop and say, "Oh, where was it, dear? Maybe I know." And maybe they do. So let them help you. Write letters. You know, the way you do it with a pen and a piece of paper and an envelope and a stamp? Write letters. Find the real parish clerk, not the online parish clerks, but the real honest-to-God parish clerks. And if you look up the parish on the internet, it will tell you who all the officers are for the parish, and it will tell you who the parish clerk is, and you write to that parish clerk, because they know the records inside out and backwards. They know where the old books are. Don't just take it for granted that they're in the county record office or the local registration district office, because they may not be. They may still be right there in the church. So write to the real parish clerk. I did that when I was looking for Hamley ancestors. And the Hamleys came out here one at a time, dribble, drabble. And so I wrote to the home parish. And he said, yes, I know, they left, yeah, but you should talk to so-and-so, who came here last year from New Zealand. She's related to you, you know. Anyway, I wrote to her, and she said, oh, that's where their sister went, to Canada. I could never find out. And I wrote back and said, I could never find out where the boys went. So they went to New Zealand, and she went to Canada. So since then, I have found all kinds of New Zealand relatives. And one of these days, when we can afford the trip, we're going to go over and sponge off them for a week. There you go. But unless you write letters to people, you don't know what's going to happen. It's like, what do you call those things? Dominoes. It's a domino effect. It really is. It just flips over, and before you know it, you have got some of the most wonderful information. So don't forget to go back to old letter writing. You're certainly going to build some good memories from it. Certainly are. Questions or comments?
Yes. I would like to know how you traveled around in Ireland and England. Did you drive at all, or?
Just depends. In Ireland, we took the bus and the train. I did a lot of research before we went about bus stops, and one of the buses stopped at Hanratty's pub. It said that right in the bus schedule. Bus stopped at Hanratty's Pub, so that's where we went to catch the bus, out in front of Hanratty's Pub. Anyway, we did bus and train in Ireland. In Cornwall, we have the relatives to take us around. When we went up to Dorset, we rented a car and just hoped and prayed that Roger could keep his wits about him and stay on the wrong side of the road for a change. It's hair-raising. At one point, we were on the wrong side on the freeway, or what do you call it, the motorway, and we took the off-ramp up onto the and the policeman came along and went and showed us where we should have gone, and we kind of went. But another time we were going round and round and round the roundabout, and we didn't know how to get off. It was our first roundabout, and we didn't know how to get off, and it was one of these that was a mile across, you know, it was huge, and it had about 10 roads coming off it, and he came up beside us, and he went, and he speeded up and pulled out in front of us, so we just got in behind him, and he took us right where we wanted to go. I'm sure he saw me going, and that's it. And the next time we went around, went, that's where I'm looking at the sign above, eh? So he knew right where we wanted to go anyway. But yeah, it's tricky with a car, but you can do it. Buses are few and far between in Cornwall and Devon. When we asked to go to this place or that place, we were told it was an obscure journey, and you could not get there from here on a bus. In Ireland, there was a couple of places like that. My girlfriend wanted me to look up her family while I was there, and I did. And I checked the bus schedule. If I went out on Friday, I couldn't come back to Belfast until Monday. So I didn't go out, needless to say. But it's very erratic. Public transport over there is not good. If you're in a small place and you need a car and you don't have relatives to take you around, the taxis are not that expensive. So take a taxi. So it depends on the area, how you get around.
I was at one of these, it's called WhatsApp, at the Brooklyn Library last week. And so they talk about apps for your devices. And she mentioned on Google Play Store, you can look for a negative scanner. So you could,
Yeah,
you know, I guess you can transform your negatives into.
that's right. If you, because you know, in the back of your picture folder, there's always a strip of film, and that's the negs. You got your pictures in the front and your negs in the back. Well, you take the pictures out and you hand them around to family, and all you're left with after a few years is a packet full of negatives.
Right.
And those negative scanners are great because you can turn them back into photographs again.
Yeah, apparently you can get them on, you know, online in an app. And put
Yeah.
them on your phone.
Yeah, well, I don't have a phone to need an app, but they're not much good to me. But yeah, if you do have an iPhone, there's some of these things are really good for traveling around. The same with those little Flip Pal scanners that fit right in your purse. They're good to take when you're out doing stuff like that, especially a document in a repository somewhere. They're really good, and they're not heavy to carry. So,
Have you ever had any aha victory dances in any of the record offices? Just curious.
yes, in the Devon record office, I decided to check the land records. And I found them, and they were landowners. All I knew was, and it was Diggory Branton, and his will was in 1642 or something like that, 1624 maybe. And I knew he was fairly well-to-do because he left all his children and grandchildren, he left his children money, £5, and in the 1600s, £5 was an awful lot of money. But then he left his grandchildren 1 ewe sheep, every one of them. 1 ewe sheep. So he was a prosperous sheep farmer. So I knew there was land, but I didn't know how long it had lasted in the family. Because when you have 10 kids and you've got to divide 10 acres between 10 kids, each one doesn't have very much. And I thought, boy, this land couldn't last very long. And I looked up the records in the Devon Record Office at Exeter, and it told me what fields they had owned. And I went on another website, and it lists all the fields in England and their number and their name. Every field in England is numbered and named. And so I looked that up for Devon to find out where the land was that they had, and it was right around where exactly I thought it was, a little place called Welcome, and they owned all that land all the way around. So that was an aha moment there, because I wasn't sure how long that land had lasted, but well into the 1800s. Yeah, and some of the cousins, distant cousins, are still on it. Yeah, I found that out from a family researcher I met who's still over there. Yeah. So.
And I'll bet Welcome here in just east of Bowmanville is probably people who came from that area.
Yes, I'm sure it is, because all the way from Coburg through to Oshawa was settled quite heavily by Cornish folk, so, and Devon folk. So, and Welcome is, the Coombe runs down through to the ocean. Morwenstow Parish in Cornwall on that side of the Coombe, Heartland Parish at Welcome on that side of the Coombe. From one side or the other, you can see one another. You can, you can see the church towers, you can see the buildings, you can see everything. And if you have a way to get across the little river in the bottom, you can walk over. So, thank you so much for coming out. I hope I've been able to help you find a way to find your ancestral homes. And it's fun, believe me, when you see it and you've just got to touch those stones.
So thank you again, Cher. And here's a small token of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I have to admit, I have been in England and done a little bit of research around. My best one was the Norfolk record office, and I went looking for the parish in Norwich called St. Martin at Oak, and I looked around the area and I thought, thank God they came to Canada.
What was wrong with it?
Oh, it was a real slum. But I mean, Norwich has probably 25 parishes in it, so it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't find their houses, but I did find the parish church.
Yeah.
And it's literally locked up, lock, stock, and barrel, and nothing happening there anymore. Yeah.
What a shame.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's get Steve up here.
Oops, I just missed it. Okay, as some of you will remember, we did our brick walls in January, and this is a follow-up to one of the stories we talked about. Yeah, there we go. And it happens to be mine just because. If you remember, I had this 1850 census from Buffalo, New York, and it says Louisiana on the census, but her name was really Rosanna. Rosanna MacDonald, born in Ireland, and Eliza Orr, born in Canada. Now, Rosanna was actually an Orr before she got married. Tucson MacDonald is actually her second husband. And I wondered what the connection was between the two of them. Both having the same maiden name. Eliza born about 1833 in Canada. Rosanna born about 1810 in County Cavan, Ireland. She came to New York State in the late 1820s with a small family. Her husband died in 1828, and she didn't remarry until 1840 in the Buffalo area in Erie County, New York. Tucson's first family was born in Markham Township, York County, Upper Canada. I wanted to know how or if Eliza Orr was related to Rosanna, where she was born in Canada, who were her parents and siblings, and what happened to her after 1850. The best solution we came up with at the time was maybe to check every single Orr family in Canada, or at least in Upper Canada, maybe even Lower Canada, and see who had a daughter Eliza. A big task, as you can well imagine. So I cheated. I decided on an Orr project, but I was going to start with any Orr born in County Cavan, Ireland. And I took all the records from Irish websites, Canadian websites, ancestry records, if there was a family tree that had one. I knew it wasn't a big search. I'd kind of plotted it out before, and there aren't a lot of Orrs from County Cavan in any of the records. And of course I did searches through Google as well. So I wanted to see where it would take me.
You're still trying to find out if you're related to Bobby Orr.
Well, you never know. I'll have to track down a couple of families that are coming up here. Okay, what I did find was a Google search turned up the following entry at olivetreegenealogy.com. It was immigrants proceeding to Upper Canada, which is where I wanted to end up, via New York, 1817 to 1819, in the Upper Canada Sundries. Number 17336, a William Orr, native of County Cavan, carpenter. Well, fortunately, these Upper Canada Sundries are online, the actual records. This index was actually also printed in families, I found out later, but I got this one off the internet. There's the heading of the original document, 17336, but unfortunately his document was kind of squished together and a lot of it was hard to read, so I didn't bother printing it out on here. But the full information said he was a native of County Cavan, he was a carpenter, there was no family, and he was heading to Upper Canada from New York on the 8th of April, 1817. Well, I did some researching on the internet for families of a William Orr. And I hit one website, which I can no longer find, when I went looking to put it up on the slideshow, that there was one who had married in Toronto in 1817. This pointed me towards York County, and the only early church records that I know of for sure there are the St. James Cathedral records. There's a picture courtesy of the Toronto branch website. So I went looking in these records, and sure enough, the records have been transcribed by the Toronto branch of OGS, and marriage number 365, so it's one of the early ones, on the 24th of July, 1817, only a couple months after A. William Orr, who is a carpenter again, we're still looking at carpenters, of York, and Anne Armstrong, spinster of York, they were wed. Because it's just a couple of months from when he came from New York to Canada, I figured, oh, it can't be the same guy. Later research shows James Shannon, he signed up the same day in New York to come to Canada. So it probably is the right guy. And if so, Anne Armstrong and William Orr must have known each other, unless he was a real smooth operator. They must have known each other either from County Cavan in Ireland, or from New York, or both. Kind of the subject of another whole talk would be the early settlers of Cavan Township, who apparently a whole group of them came up from New York in 1816 and were sent and issued land in Cavan Township, Durham County. And William was one of the later ones. He wasn't among the original group, but the notice in one of the petitions does say there will be another group coming up next year. And I'm assuming he was part of the follow-up group. John Armstrong, whom I'm guessing, I haven't done full research yet for Anne, was one of the early ones in 1816. He's one of the head ones. And I believe he was probably Anne's father, and he was from County Cavan in Ireland, from a little place called Ashfield. It's up near the border of County Monaghan and Cavan, and quite a few of the other ones were from that area as well. So I'm hoping the Orrs knew each other, nor knew the Armstrongs back in Ireland, and that's where my people are from. As I say, that's another research talk for another time. So, okay, we found the marriage. We're going to look for baptisms now to see what I can find. Well, I did find some Orrs that were baptized in St. James Cathedral, or it would have been a church at the time, I would think. But there was a William Orr, son of Breaky Orr and Margaret Orr. And Breaky Orr is a carpenter as well. And he was born 8th of January 1829, baptized on the 22nd of February. And look who the witnesses are, William Orr and Anne Orr. Quite logically, they possibly are brothers. No proof, but it looks like they knew each other for sure. So I kept looking for more Orrs in the records. There weren't a lot, but there was this one. Elizabeth Orr, daughter of Breaky Orr and Margaret Orr again. He's still a carpenter in York, 1831. Baptized in April. Witnessed by Rosanna Dunn. Probably my ancestor. There's the connection. Now, there's an aha moment right there, I tell you, when I found that. Or a bingo moment. I call it a bingo moment. You can't see Leslie Nielsen, but that's him in there. I love the clip. So I have an Elizabeth Orr, born in 1831, probably in York, which is now Toronto, and it was witnessed by Rosanna Dunn. And we have Eliza Orr in the 1850 census, born about 1833, so very close. And she's residing with Rosanna Orr Dunn, MacDonald, because by that time in 1850 she's married to MacDonald. She married in 1840, so she would have been Rosanna Dunn still in 1831, but by 1840 she was a MacDonald. And I believe they are probably one and the same. I have been able to find out that Breaky Orr supposedly died in the early 1840s in Illinois. He was building a church there. And interestingly enough, the story of an Orr falling off a roof is come down in one of the other lines of the descendants as well. Through William's line, I believe it was. It appears that his young family was sent to relatives after his death because 2 and maybe 3 of the children appear to have been raised by William and Anne Orr in Cavan Township, Durham County. Breaky's widow was located in the 1850 Illinois census without any of her Orr children at all. I think Eliza was being raised by Rosanna and Tucson MacDonald. Some of the kids were given to William, some of the kids went to Rosanna. It is all just a theory, but it looks really good. Breaky's widow did eventually come to Canada in 1861. You can find her in the Port Hope census. By then, most of her kids are married and have moved on. But she did end up in the same general area, close to Cavan Township, and she would have been near William and Anne.
Which side of the Cavan Wars was that family on?
Sorry?
The Cavan disputes? Which side was that family on, do you think?
That's the tricky one. I don't even know what religion they were.
Okay.
As far as, I suspect that her original husband was Philip Dunn, and he was supposed to have been Catholic. But by the time they came over here, most of these Orrs are not Catholic. So I'm wondering if one of the reasons they got out of Ireland when they did was Catholic married a Protestant.
What about that MacDonald name? That's a Protestant name, would it not be?
I would think it would be, but I really don't know. They certainly weren't Catholic. They did. I've got them in one census, and I can't remember off the top of my head what religion they were, but it wasn't Catholic for
The
sure.
reason I ask is my relatives are from that area too, but I don't know if they were involved in the battles, barn burnings and all that stuff.
So, my speculative Orr family, 3 siblings, William, 1797 to 1852. He did live a will, and I haven't seen it yet. I'm just praying that he mentions his nieces and nephews in it, because I don't think he had any children. Brakey, he's the one with all the, about 5 or 6 kids, but he dies early, and they get dispersed. And then Rosanna, she had 4 sons, only one survived till he was an adult, and that was their son William Daniel. And of course my ancestor, or I wouldn't be here. So, the questions, are they answered? How was she related? Probably a niece. Where was she born in Canada? Probably in York, which is of course now Toronto. Who were her parents? Brakey and Margaret, maiden name Courtney, or she had siblings William, Brakey, Alexander, Margaret Ann, and then one elder sister that I haven't identified yet. Brakey Jr. probably died very young. I don't think he's in the 1840 census. But we do have his baptism, so we know he existed. He was baptized in New York. They moved around a lot. What happened to her after 1850? No clue. That's the only question I can't really answer at this time. If she was being raised by the McDonalds, she probably married in New York and is down there somewhere. Now, if Williams Orr's will mentioned all his nieces and nephews, I have a chance. But if he didn't, then I'm out of luck. But that is our little brick wall breakthrough.
Any questions for Steve? Okay. So, we do have a DNA Special Interest Group meeting April 17th. That's a Wednesday night. It will be in the 3rd floor boardroom in our library. And hopefully we won't be quite so discombobulated as we currently are. We'll find out. We have asked if they could at least put some of the floor back down from the second flood. We'll see. Okay. Doesn't like me. There we go. Okay, just needed 3 clicks, that's all. Okay, so our May meeting is the 7th of May. Sandra McNamara, who is a new speaker for us, is going to do 2 kind of shorter presentations put together. First one's I'm researching through using Facebook. And her second little talk is Tricks and Trades of a Genealogy Sleuth. And then in June, we've got our eagerly anticipated snowed out one from February, Bob Dawes and the Family History Reno Project. So that's looking forward to that one. We do have a few minutes. If anybody has got a brick wall they want a little brainstorming on, feel free to put your hand up. Okay, I gave you this homework last month. You're getting a D in your subject here, you know? Steve did some work, which was great. Okay, this is your homework for next month then. Come with a few names and dates and we'll see what we can do for you. I know you have brick walls. Okay? Because I've got about 10 of them. And when you get through one, you find another one. So,
Nancy,
yes, Ann.
there's something that I have always wondered.
Okay.
Okay, so Dan has an ancestor that was one of triplets, and he was born in Pontypool.
Do you want to say it into the mic?
Okay.
Okay.
Dan has an ancestor who was one of triplets who were born in Pontypool in 1864.
Okay.
So that's before the civil registration,
Yes.
and it's a small place without much money. They don't have a newspaper, and we haven't been able to find any record of their birth or any information, baptism or anything. I mean, there's lots of information later where they say when they were born and that sort of stuff that, you know, from years later, because the two brothers stayed around in the area and had children and but we haven't been able to find any primary information about them actually being born. We found a photograph that was taken of them when they were babies, that we found from the family reunion that we had, you know, so it was great. But is there any place that you can think of that we could look for information about Pontypool, other than, you know, official records, which we tried to pretty well look through?
Look at Cher's got her hand up.
Sher.
What church did they go to?
No information about that.
Maybe Western Methodist.
Methodist was.
They were Methodist. Well, I don't really think they were very religious, but if they'd been in any church, they would have been in it.
If they were baptized, then the minister might have written it in his notebook. He may not have passed it on to a registrar because it wasn't mandatory.
Right. Yes.
But if you can find what minister served the church in that year,
Yes.
or that's 3-year, 4-year period, because it was usually every 3 years. The Methodists and the Bible Christians changed ministers every 3 years. So in that time frame, find out who the minister was in the church and see if the United Church Archives has his notebook.
Okay.
There is a publication that I've used at the United Church Archives when it was in Victoria College. I'm not even sure where it is now. I'd have to do some looking up. Where's that?
Oak Street,
Oak Street now.
off of Parliament.
Off Parliament? Okay, thank you. And the book, it's a tome about this thick, and it's called a cyclopedia, not an encyclopedia, a cyclopedia of Methodism or Methodist ministers or something along that line. Because I've used that book to research somebody who married my ancestors down Western District area. But hopefully you'd be able to find perhaps which minister was there.
There's a set of 2 volumes at Bowmanville Museum, Methodism in Canada, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and it lists all the ministers.
Okay.
Before and after.
Well, look at that, Ann.
That's
3 blocks away from your house.
conveniently located.
That's if it's still there.
And mention what we got for our $10 at the Bowmanville Museum.
Yes. Okay. So the Bowmanville Archives.
Yeah.
They haven't advertised that for $10 they'll tell you the history of your house. Anything they can find in their archives about your house. So Dan went and he paid $10. And we got a phone call a few days later saying they found one item about there being a rubbish fire in our backyard, and that was the only thing they could find. So Dan looked on the internet and found all kinds more stuff, you know, in the Bowmanville Statesman and stuff. So we are disappointed in their service.
What name's out in Pontypool?
Oh, the triplets' names.
DeLong,
Delon?
The parents' names.
and Henderson,
Henderson and Delon?
yes.
Pontypool was is there any railway records?
They were not,
Yes.
they weren't, had nothing to do with the
Are
railway,
you
but,
sure at some time he might have?
yeah, they were sort of,
What brought them to the area?
they were working on farms, clearing stumps and just,
Mike Lenny's and Thompson's and all that come from that area.
they were related to the Decker family.
Graham.
And, no, that was later.
Oh.
Okay, they were related to they came up from New York with the Deckers, and they came because the Deckers came. And they lived near, some of them lived near Elizabethville, Wesleyville, that sort of thing, but yeah, so they were mostly not owning any land, but they were just working on people's farms. But yes, you're right, I haven't looked to see if maybe somebody in the family had a job on the railway, but I'm not sure how they would get any children's birth information out of that, so.
Unless it would give you a clue where they came from.
Well,
You know that.
no, we
Yeah,
know where they
yeah.
came from.
Yeah.
It's not the history of the family that we don't have, it's just that it would be nice to have some official or even a newspaper report or something. You would think that having triplets would be of interest, that, you know, lots of children's births were not recorded before the registration, but.
Yeah. The other thing is, look along the railway in case they were ever baptized, let's say in Burton. My great-grandfather worked for the railway in Burton, and one of his jobs was to walk halfway to Pontypool and meet the other guy coming from the other way, checking the rails every day. So, like, people did move along that, and I remember my grandmother saying that her mother almost like a handful of times, 3 or 4 times, ever came to Oshawa, but she'd actually been in Toronto a few times. Or because she could hop on the railway. Oshawa was hard to get to, Toronto was easy.
Okay, so you're thinking they might have been baptized in Burton if there was a church there that they
Yeah,
liked?
there was,
Okay.
yeah.
Good.
And other ones along the way, and there was families, like I've got family in Burton and Pontypool area, and sort of in between.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
We tend to forget that the railways were really
The roads.
quite used in their heyday.
There was no 115 highway in those days.
That's right.
And there was also, Burton was a junction and swung up to the north from there. And my great-grandmother used to work at the lunch counter in the railway station there. And sometimes there would have to be a train change, so people would stop there and you'd sell them lunch or whatever. So that, yeah, they might have had a connection there, there might have been a social.
I'm wondering if Pontypool would have had newspaper reports down in like the Coburg Star and those newspapers.
The Pontypool had reports in the Bowmanville Statesman and the Orono paper, but there's nothing.
Oh, okay.
We checked that.
What about Millbrook?
Millbrook have a newspaper?
I don't know for sure.
Hard to say.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's a little bigger than.
And I've got an inventory of Ontario newspapers that,
Yes.
have you got a copy of that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I'll lend it to you sometime and you can look at, circle around what newspapers
Yes.
there might also be,
Yes.
okay? Because I know the Coburg papers are at the newspapers are on microfilm down at the Coburg Library, and that's easy to get to. Okay, anybody else have any suggestions for Ann?
Maybe man
Okay. Well, here's your eagerly awaited moment. We have a 50-50 draw. Did we get anybody wanting the Roots Magic?
No,
Oh dear.
no one was interested.
Oh dear.
But we have a prize of $16.50 for the 50.
Oh, good.
And to unwrap it.
Oh, there you go, all shaken up.
Thank you, Elvis.
Pardon?
Thank you, Elvis. Yeah. No tickets in here. Just one first. $1.99.
Fixed.
Oh, Andy,
Is it fixed? How much did you have to pay him, Andy?
Put that on your income tax.
So, you should go and look at the Facebook group. There's quite a good discussion going on there sometimes. I did actually get the surnames list fixed that we can now add again to it. For a while there, we had some complaints that it wouldn't save. The save button got lost on the previous document, so it's fixed up now. And don't forget, that's our meeting next month. Hopefully in this room. If not, maybe over in the Sunday school. We've seen almost every room in the church. Okay, thanks everybody. And don't forget that the library is open the 3rd and 4th Fridays of each month from 10 to 1. Steve will be more than happy to help you. I think Deb's missing for the next month, isn't she? Yeah, so Steve will be there and he will point you in the right direction. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.